The city burned as if the sky itself had declared war upon it. Smoke coiled into the heavens, twisting in shades of orange and red, while the frantic screams of the helpless filled the air. The air was thick with the acrid scent of burning metal and charred stone. But beneath it all, a different scent lingered, something primal, something that smelled of change. Varian had not come to this planet to be a hero. In truth, he had come to disappear. The war between the Union of Galactic Powers and the Dominion of Zalketh had reduced entire star systems to rubble, and those who fought in it, men like Varian, were left as nothing more than ghosts of a shattered past. He had chosen Kasara 3 because it was insignificant, a planet on the fringes of civilization, barely advanced enough to have working spaceports, let alone anything of military interest. But as he stood amidst the chaos, watching the city crumble around him, he realized that insignificance was an illusion. A cry cut through the din of destruction, sharp and panicked. Varian turned just in time to see the crumbling remains of a building teeter dangerously, its structural supports snapping one by one. Beneath it, pinned beneath a fallen beam, was a young woman, her silver hair streaked with soot, her violet eyes wide with fear. Without hesitation, he moved. His cybernetically enhanced limbs carried him forward with inhuman speed, his reinforced grip snapping the beam in two before he hoisted her into his arms and sprinted away, just as the building collapsed entirely. She coughed violently, gripping his arm as she tried to regain her breath. "Who?" she rasped, her voice hoarse from the smoke. "Not important," Varian said. "Can you stand?" She shook her head, her legs too weak from exhaustion. "All right," he muttered, shifting her weight against him as he carried her further from the destruction. The fire raged around them, but his mind was already working, analyzing their surroundings. The evacuation zones had likely been overwhelmed by now. If he wanted them to get out of here alive, they needed another route. "There's a bunker," the woman coughed out, pointing toward the east. Hidden beneath the old transport hub, Varian frowned but didn't question her. Good enough. As they moved, the sounds of the battle became clearer. This was no ordinary fire. The Dominion was here. He recognized their drop pods, the way they turned cities into smoldering graves before the real invasion force even landed. If that was the case, this wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about making sure there was something left to survive for. They reached the transport hub just as enemy soldiers began sweeping through the streets. Varian pressed himself against a crumbling wall, watching as the insectoid Zalketh warriors moved in formation, their chitinous armor glistening in the firelight. They were methodical, efficient, merciless. "What's your name?" he whispered to the woman. "Liara," she replied just as softly. "Yours?" "Varian." She stiffened. "Varian Salas?" His expression darkened. He didn't answer. Liara stared at him, realization dawning in her eyes. "You're the butcher of Veldranus. The soldier who—" "Not a soldier," he cut her off. "Not anymore." Liara's gaze searched his face, but she said nothing more. Instead, she pointed toward a pile of rubble that concealed a hidden passage beneath the transport hub. "We can get underground through there." Varian nodded, leading the way. They slipped past the enemy patrols, moving through the ruins like shadows. The tunnel entrance was half buried, but with his enhanced strength, Varian cleared the debris in moments. They descended into the darkness just as the Zalketh reached their position above. The underground shelter was larger than he expected, filled with civilians, injured fighters, and remnants of Kasara 3's defense forces. Eyes turned to him and Liara as they entered. A murmur spread through the crowd. Liara, a man in battle-worn armor, stepped forward, relief washing over his face. "We thought you were dead." "Not yet," she replied, glancing at Varian. "Thanks to him." The man frowned, studying Varian with suspicion. "Who is he?" "Varian Salas." The words left her lips like a spark igniting dry kindling. The room fell silent. Varian felt the weight of 100 eyes upon him. He had spent years trying to bury his past, to fade into obscurity. But war never lets go of its ghosts. "You were a hero once," the man finally said. "Before you vanished." "Heroes are just killers on the right side of history," Varian muttered. Then maybe it's time for you to be on the right side again, Liara said. He met her gaze and saw something there. Determination, hope, something he hadn't felt in years. Outside, the fires still raged. The Dominion was tightening its grip. The people in this shelter had no chance of survival unless someone gave them one. Varian clenched his fists. Maybe it was time to stop running. Maybe it was time to fight. And maybe, just maybe, it was time for a ghost to become a hero again. Varian took a slow breath, inhaling the scent of scorched metal and desperation. The weight of the crowd's expectations pressed against him like an invisible force. They were waiting for him to speak, to act, to become something he had long abandoned. He wasn't ready for this, but the universe didn't wait for readiness. A distant explosion rumbled overhead, shaking the underground bunker. Dust rained from the ceiling, and cries of alarm rippled through the gathered civilians. The Dominion was moving fast. If they found the bunker, there would be no escape. Varian turned to Liara. Tell me about the defenses. Weapons, numbers, what do we have? She nodded, snapping into focus. We've got about 60 fighters. Some are trained militia, but most are just civilians with scavenged rifles. We have maybe 20 energy weapons, a few grenades, and a single pulse cannon that barely works. Varian exhaled through his nose. Not enough. Not by a long shot. He glanced at the man in battle-worn armor. You got a name? Captain Oris Dane. The man said stiffly. All right, Oris, here's the situation. Your people are dead if they stay here. We can't hold off a full-scale invasion with scavenged weapons. Oris bristled. And what do you suggest? Running? Varian shook his head. Fighting smart. The Dominion isn't just here to kill. They're here to secure this planet for occupation. That means supply lines, staging points, command nodes. We don't hit them head-on. We take out their support structure, make this planet more trouble than it's worth. Oris narrowed his eyes. You talk like you've done this before. I have. A long pause. Then Oris gave a short nod. What do you need? Varian turned to Liara. Do you have access to the city's maintenance tunnels? She nodded. There's an old transit system that runs beneath the city. Some of it collapsed years ago, but there are still usable sections. Good. We'll use it to move unseen. Our first target is their communication relay. If we blind them, we buy time. Then we hit their supply lines, force them into a logistical nightmare. Liara hesitated. That's going to make them angrier. That's the point, Varian said. The Dominion doesn't back down from a fight, but they do back off from a quagmire. We don't have to win. We just have to make them decide this isn't worth it. Oris studied him, then glanced at Liara. And you trust him? She hesitated, then nodded. I do. Oris sighed. Then let's get to work. Hours later, Varian knelt in the shadows of a collapsed tunnel, overlooking a Dominion communications outpost. The insectoid Zalketh warriors moved in disciplined formations, their chitinous armor reflecting the flickering fires around them. He studied their movements, analyzing patterns. Their relay station was lightly guarded, likely because they didn't expect resistance this deep into occupied territory. A fatal mistake. He turned to Liara and Oris, who crouched beside him. Behind them, a dozen fighters waited in silence, their faces tense. Varian whispered, 2 guards at the entrance, rotating patrol every 4 minutes. 2 snipers on the rooftop. We need a quiet approach. Oris smirked. You want quiet, you got the wrong guy. Varian smirked back. Then let me handle it. Before Oris could argue, Varian was already moving. Enhanced muscles propelled him forward, his footsteps unnaturally silent. He slipped behind the first guard, wrapping an arm around its throat. The alien struggled, but he twisted sharply, snapping its spine. The second guard barely had time to react before Varian buried his knife beneath its mandibles. 2 down. He signaled to the others. Oris and his fighters moved in, silencing patrols with ruthless efficiency. Within minutes, they had control of the outpost. Liara sprinted to the relay console, her fingers flying over the controls. I'm setting off a feedback loop. This will fry their communications for hours. Varian turned to Oris. Get everyone back to the tunnels. We don't want to be here when they send reinforcements. As the others retreated, Liara hesitated. Varian, you could have left. You could have just saved me and disappeared. Why are you really doing this? He looked at her, his expression unreadable. Because I'm tired of running. With that, he turned and disappeared into the night. The revolution had begun. The silence before the storm was always the worst part. The moment before the Dominion realized what had happened. The moment before the chaos truly began. Varian led the fighters back into the tunnels, his enhanced vision cutting through the dim light. They moved quickly, efficiently, but the weight of what they had just done clung to the air. They had struck the first blow. There was no turning back now. Liara kept pace beside him, her breathing still uneven from the rush of it all. We just shut down their entire field network. How long do you think we have before they retaliate? Hours, if we're lucky. Less if they're smart. Behind them, Oris grumbled. They'll be coming down on us like a goddamn meteor storm. We should be getting off this planet, not digging in deeper. Varian didn't slow his pace. And go where? The Dominion doesn't just leave survivors. They purge. We make a stand, or we die in the rubble. Oris cursed under his breath, but didn't argue further. He knew Varian was right. They reached a section of the tunnels that had partially collapsed years ago, forcing them to navigate through crumbling debris. Varian moved ahead, scouting for weak points. The walls here were ancient, barely holding together. A well-placed charge could bring the whole section down, sealing them off from pursuit. He turned to one of the younger fighters, a wiry kid named Ran. Set charges here. When we pass through, we collapse it behind us. Ran nodded and got to work. Liara touched Varian's arm, her voice lower now. Where are we heading? Varian exhaled. We need weapons. Real weapons. There's an old Union supply cache buried beneath the industrial sector. If it's still intact, we might just have a fighting chance. Oris folded his arms. And if it's not? Then we improvise. They moved deeper into the tunnels, the weight of the world pressing down on them. The Dominion would be searching for them now. Every second counted. They reached the exit point near the industrial ruins. Varian signaled for silence before creeping up the old ladder and peeking out through a rusted grate. The city above was unrecognizable. The Dominion had fortified their hold, with patrols moving in tight formations, aerial drones sweeping the streets, and massive war walkers stationed at key intersections. Varian muttered a curse. They're locking it down faster than I thought. Liara frowned. Can we still reach the cache? We'll have to be ghosts, Varian said. Move through the ruins, avoid contact, and get in and out before they even know we were there. Oris scoffed. Stealth missions with civilians. What could go wrong? Despite himself, Varian smirked. Try not to shoot anything unless I say so. They moved into the ruins, keeping low, weaving through collapsed buildings and burned-out vehicles. The air was thick with the stench of ozone and charred flesh. The Dominion's presence was suffocating. At one point, a patrol of Zalketh soldiers passed mere feet from their position. Everyone held their breath as the insectoid warriors clicked to one another in their guttural language before moving on. Varian waited a full 10 seconds before signaling the group forward again. The supply cache was buried beneath the remnants of an old Union storage facility. It took them another hour to reach the entrance, an unassuming hatch half buried under rubble. Varian crouched beside it, wiping away dust and dirt. The biometric scanner was still intact, its dull red light blinking steadily. He pressed his palm against it, half expecting it to reject him after all these years. Instead, the scanner flickered green. The hatch hissed open, revealing a dark passage leading underground. Oris whistled low. Guess you still have friends in high places. Not friends, Varian muttered. Just old ghosts. They descended into the cache, sealing the hatch behind them. The moment the lights flickered on, the tension in the room shifted. Racks of weapons lined the walls, pulse rifles, plasma grenades, heavy repeaters, even a few anti-armor launchers. Enough firepower to turn the tide of a war. Rin let out a breathless laugh. Holy shit, we're actually doing this, aren't we? Varian picked up a rifle, checking its charge. Yeah, we are. Liara ran her fingers over a sleek sniper rifle. If we hit them hard enough, we might actually have a shot at pushing them out. Oris grabbed a grenade belt, a small one, but a shot nonetheless. Varian turned to face the group. We make this count. We don't waste ammunition. We don't fight for glory. We fight to make them bleed, to make them regret ever setting foot on this planet. They armed themselves, determination setting in like steel. And for the first time since the invasion began, the Dominion had something to fear. Varian gripped his rifle tightly, feeling the weight of the moment settle over him. He had spent years avoiding this fight, but now, there was no turning back. The people around him weren't just survivors anymore. They were fighters, ready to stand against the overwhelming force that had taken their world. He took a deep breath and looked at the team. We need to move quickly. The longer we stay in one place, the more likely they track us down. Our first target is their supply depot near the old spaceport. If we take it out, we disrupt their entire operation. Liara adjusted the strap of her gear. And after that, we focus on their fuel reserves. No supplies, no reinforcements. Oris gave a small smirk. You really want to make them uncomfortable, huh? Varian's voice was calm but firm. I want them to leave. No more words were needed. The group gathered their equipment and set off through the ruins. The once thriving city was now a shell of what it had been, its buildings reduced to crumbling structures. Overhead, automated drones patrolled the skies, scanning for movement. Dominion security teams moved in precise formations, their presence a constant reminder of the occupation. Run clenched his fists. There are still people in those holding areas. We should help them. Varian's expression hardened. Not yet. We don't have the numbers for a direct rescue. First, we weaken their control. Then we come back for them. Rin hesitated, but eventually nodded. As they reached the outskirts of the supply depot, they took cover behind the remains of a collapsed building. Dominion troops guarded the facility, while automated security systems monitored the perimeter. Varian analyzed the layout. Snipers take out key sentries. Oris, take a team to disable the security systems. Liara, find a good vantage point for support. She nodded and moved into position. Oris adjusted his gear. And you? Varian secured a small energy disruptor to his belt. I'm going in. Before anyone could argue, he slipped through the shadows, moving with trained precision. Years of experience guided his every step, allowing him to move undetected. The first guard barely had time to react before Varian carefully neutralized him and moved the unconscious figure out of sight. One by one, he disabled the outer security, ensuring no alarms were triggered. Liara's voice came through his earpiece. Perimeter is clear. You're good to go. Varian reached the central storage area, where large containers of supplies were stacked in careful formations. The Dominion operated with strict efficiency. Every resource was accounted for, every ration and power cell vital to their mission. He began placing small disruption devices at key points, setting them to overload the supply station's internal systems. As he armed the last one, he sensed movement from behind. A Dominion officer had spotted him, its multiple eyes narrowing in realization. Varian acted fast, using a stun device to disable the officer before it could alert the others. But it was too late. The facility's alert system activated, and heavy footsteps echoed as Dominion reinforcements rushed in. We're compromised, Varian said into his calm, get clear. Energy blasts lit up the area as the team quickly fell back, moving through the ruins as the Dominion forces advanced. Liara provided cover from her position, ensuring they had time to escape. As they reached the outer perimeter, Varian activated the disruptors. The facility's systems overloaded, causing controlled malfunctions that left the supply depot inoperable. Equipment short-circuited, and storage areas became inaccessible. From their safe position in the underground tunnels, the team caught their breath. Oris exhaled sharply. That was intense. Rin grinned. We actually did it. Liara turned to Varian. What now? Varian checked his equipment, his expression steady. Now we keep going. The tunnels stretched ahead, dark and damp, but to Varian and his team, they were a lifeline. One of the last places the Dominion hadn't fully mapped. For now, they moved quickly, their boots barely making a sound against the stone. The distant rumble of Dominion patrols above reminded them that the enemy wasn't going to sit back after what they had just done. The disruption at the supply depot had sent a clear message. Resistance was alive and well. Oris adjusted his gear, glancing back. I'll give them credit. They responded fast. Varian kept his eyes forward. They have to. If word spreads that they can be challenged, others might stand up. Liara checked her sniper rifle. Good. Let's make sure they don't have time to recover. Ren's voice was eager. Where to next? Varian reached a junction in the tunnels and motioned for them to stop. Pulling up a small holographic map, he pointed to a blinking marker. Fuel reserves. Without them, their patrol crafts and transport shuttles are grounded. If we do this right, they'll be stuck relying on whatever's already in orbit. Oris let out a low whistle. You're thinking big. Varian gave a small smirk. If we're going to do this, we do it right. The plan was simple, at least on paper. The Dominion had set up their fuel reserves in a heavily fortified section of the industrial district, using repurposed infrastructure to store and refine energy for their ships. That meant automated defenses, reinforced barriers, and a high concentration of troops. A direct assault was out of the question, but a well-placed chain reaction? That could do the trick. Moving through the tunnels, they reached an old access hatch beneath the industrial district. The Dominion had sealed most of these routes early in their occupation, but Varian knew how to get past their security. With a few quick keystrokes on a portable device, the electronic lock flickered before releasing with a soft hiss. The hatch opened into an abandoned service corridor, filled with rusted pipes and dim emergency lighting. The air smelled of oil and coolant. Varian led the way, his senses sharp. The main refinery was just ahead, separated by a security checkpoint. A handful of guards patrolled the area, their alien voices murmuring to one another. Liara positioned herself behind a stack of crates. I can take them out quietly. Varian shook his head. No need. We slip past. No alarms. The team moved with careful precision, staying in the shadows, timing their steps with the rhythmic hum of machinery. A Dominion officer passed just feet from them, completely unaware. Once clear of the checkpoint, they reached the main refinery. Massive containment tanks lined the walls, filled with refined fuel. Overhead, robotic arms moved in mechanical precision, transferring the volatile liquid to transport ships docked at a nearby landing pad. Varian pointed to the largest tanks. That's our target. Ren hesitated. Are we sure about this? That's a lot of fuel. Oris chuckled. That's the point. The team spread out, placing controlled charges at key structural points. Unlike the supply depot, this strike needed to be carefully executed. A mistimed explosion could set off a disaster before they had the chance to escape. As Varian secured the final charge, his communicator crackled. Liara's voice was tense. We have a problem. Extra patrols just arrived. Heavily armed. Varian glanced toward the exit. Sure enough, Dominion forces were moving into position, blocking their path. They know someone's here, he muttered. Oris tightened his grip on his weapon. Guess we're fighting our way out. Varian thought fast. They couldn't afford to get pinned down, not here. Change of plan. Liara, create a distraction. Draw them toward the far side of the facility. She didn't hesitate. Moments later, a well-placed shot rang out, hitting a fuel line near a loading bay. Flames erupted as Dominion forces turned their attention to the sudden explosion. Move, Varian ordered. The team sprinted for the exit, using the chaos to their advantage. Dominion troops scrambled to respond to the fire, giving them just enough time to slip through a maintenance tunnel leading back underground. As they cleared the danger zone, Varian pulled out the detonator. Time to shut them down. With a press of a button, the charges ignited. A deep rumble shook the ground as one containment tank ruptured, igniting the next in a chain reaction. A massive fireball erupted into the sky, turning night into day for a brief moment. The refinery was gone. The rebels regrouped in the tunnels, catching their breath. Above, sirens wailed as Dominion forces scrambled to contain the damage. Oris leaned back against the tunnel wall, laughing. I can't believe that worked. Ren looked at Varian, eyes wide. What now? Varian reloaded his rifle, his expression resolute. Now, we show them they're not in control anymore. The Dominion was reeling. The destruction of their supply depot had shaken them. The loss of their fuel reserves had crippled them. The city, once under their iron grip, was slipping through their fingers. But they weren't beaten yet. Varian and his team moved through the tunnels, the glow of distant fires casting eerie flickers along the walls. The Dominion would regroup. They would retaliate. And when they did, they would bring the full weight of their war machine down on whoever they thought was responsible. And that meant the people. "We have to get back to the shelters," Ren said, urgency in his voice. "If they strike back, they'll go after civilians." Varian nodded. He had seen it before. When an occupying force felt threatened, they made an example of the weak. And right now, the people of this city were defenseless. Liara kept her sniper rifle close. "We don't have the numbers to protect them if they come in force." "No," Varian agreed. "But we don't need to fight them head-on." Oris frowned. "What are you thinking?" Varian pulled up his holographic map. "We give them something else to worry about. We hit their command center." Ren's eyes widened. "That's suicide. Only if we do it wrong." The Dominion's command center was a towering structure at the heart of the city, a repurposed government building reinforced with alien technology. It was from there that they coordinated patrols, controlled drones, and maintained communications with their orbital fleet. Destroying it outright wasn't an option, but cutting off their ability to communicate? That would leave them blind. The team moved swiftly, using the cover of night and the city's ruins to approach the heavily fortified building. Surveillance drones hovered above, scanning for threats, while Dominion soldiers stood guard at every entrance. Liara set up on a nearby rooftop, her scope trained on the enemy's movements. "I count at least 20 on the ground. More inside." Oris let out a low whistle. "Busy place." "We're not fighting them," Varian reminded them. "We're slipping in." Using an underground maintenance tunnel, they bypassed the main checkpoints and emerged inside the building's lower levels. Dominion technicians worked at massive consoles, monitoring holographic displays filled with data. Security personnel patrolled in tight formations, unaware that intruders were already inside. Varian led the way, moving like a shadow through the halls. Every step was calculated, every movement precise. One by one, they disabled key systems, cutting power to outer defenses, jamming communications, and planting small but devastating sabotage devices. As they reached the central control room, Varian placed the final device on the main relay. "Done," he said. "Let's move." They slipped back into the tunnels just as alarms blared through the building. Seconds later, the explosives triggered, not in a fiery explosion, but in a pulse of electromagnetic disruption. Lights flickered, screens went dark, and above, in the sky, Dominion drones fell from the air like dying embers. Their entire command network had just gone silent. The city erupted. People who had cowered in fear now saw their chance. Resistance fighters who had been waiting for a moment to strike now surged forward. The Dominion forces, confused and cut off from leadership, scrambled to regain control. But it was too late. The uprising had begun. From the rooftops, Varian watched as the people took back their city. Improvised weapons clashed against Dominion armor. Resistance fighters overwhelmed patrols, cutting off escape routes. Dominion dropships, unable to coordinate, hovered in uncertainty before retreating. For the first time since the occupation began, the enemy was the one on the defensive. Oris let out a breathless laugh. "We actually did it." Ren grinned. "They're running." Liara watched through her scope. "Not all of them." Varian followed her gaze. A Dominion officer, taller and more heavily armored than the rest, stood at the heart of the chaos, barking orders in its guttural language. Even as its forces crumbled, it refused to retreat. Varian knew the type. A commander who wouldn't accept defeat. He tightened his grip on his rifle. "Then let's make sure they get the message." The final confrontation was short but decisive. With their forces in disarray, the last remaining Dominion troops fell quickly. The commander fought harder than the rest, but in the end, it fell like all the others. And then, silence. Smoke curled into the sky. Fires flickered in the ruins. But the city was free. People emerged from their hiding places, disbelief on their faces. For so long, they had lived under the Dominion's rule, believing resistance was hopeless. But now, they had one. Varian lowered his weapon, exhaustion settling into his bones. He had been a soldier, a stranger, a wanderer passing through. But now, he was something else. a rescuer, a leader, a symbol of the fight that had only just begun. Oris clapped a hand on his shoulder. So what now? Varian looked at the liberated city, at the people who now had hope again. Now, he said, we prepare for what comes next, because the Dominion wouldn't forget this, and when they returned, humanity would be ready.